Perfect.
There we go.
Okay.
So I guess we can start recording. This is James Kevin Johnson, retired drill sergeant of the United States military, United States Army, the best branch. I guess introduce yourself a little bit to the visual audience, since this is going to be recorded from my screen.
Okay, yeah. Um, yeah, so like Joseph said, I am James Kevin Johnson. I go by Kevin. I did 22 years in the United States Army and Army Reserve, 4 years on active duty. During that time, I deployed to Kosovo and Iraq, and then the rest in the reserves. And during that time, I was able to mobilize multiple times for a total of about 4 or 5 years. And I served as a drill sergeant. I ultimately also reclassed. I'm sorry, I was originally 11 Bravo infantry in the Army. So on my deployment, that's what I did. And then later on in my career, I reclassed to 31 Bravo military police and 92 Yankees unit supply specialist. So did a couple things. I never actually did those jobs though, just schools to go to.
Yeah, and we wanted to say thank you for agreeing to do this interview with us. It's kind of giving me a little bit of podcast energy, which I is probably something of interest to you and what maybe you've discussed in your own version of your telling of PTSD. So I guess first question is when did you first recognize that you were experiencing maybe some dysfunctional symptoms or features of post-traumatic stress disorder?
Um, Not right away, for sure. So when I got back from our deployment, we got back in 2005, and I remember sitting down with a social worker, and they asked, like, "Do you have PTSD?" And I said, I don't even know what that is." And she's like, "Well, if you don't know what it is, you probably don't have it, but any symptoms should subside within 8 weeks." I said, "Okay, great," and went about my merry way. Um, Shortly after that, some friends of mine and I we went on a trip to the Canary Islands for a week. They were One night we were walking around and they were popping off fireworks, and we were all very jumpy about it. We just kind of laughed it off like it was, we were just at war, like that sound, like whatever. Fast forward 90 days from the return of my deployment, I'm home, and you're away from your military family, you're away from your rifle, you know. So I went from combat 90 days later to being home, and that's when things really kind of started to set in for me. Is about 3 months later, not really realizing that that's what it was. It wasn't until I spoke with mine and Joe's Uncle Clifford. He had gone to Vietnam in 60, 68, 69. And he sat me down and told me lots of things to expect, all of which pretty much came true.
Yeah.
So,
Um, and thank you for mentioning like the fireworks. One of the key symptoms of PTSD we know is the triggers by the five senses.
mm.
So it may be some of that sound, also smell too. So I'm sure some of that might be familiar to you in that way. But what are some symptoms of PTSD that you most regularly experience?
um, well, hypervigilance is probably my biggest one. I am always just aware, right? And there's a lot of social media attention around the macho male who, like, I only sit with my back to walls, facing all exits, and blah blah blah, and I clock everything. And people kind of say that stuff like it's a badge of honor. And from my experience, it's more stressful because you are always on watch. Now that I'm married and we have now two kids. Our youngest is 11 days old. Um, that hypervigilance is more aware. Like, I don't leave my house without carrying. I'm just always just kind of on guard with that stuff. Now, I'm not as jumpy when it comes to certain sounds. Like, I'm more used to it now. For example, when a semi truck releases its air brakes, that sound is very similar to the sound of an RPG being fired. And I used to, like, jump at the sound of that. And so obviously, like, those certain triggers, they're not as bad as they used to be. But when you said smells, there's a very distinct smell that you experience in Iraq and just a combination of dirt and fuel for me. And it could be because we were also a mechanized unit, so we had the Bradley fighting vehicles, and so that constant, that dirt, that fuel, that petrol smell. Every now and again, I'll get a sense of it, and it's an instant trigger for me.
Wow. I can't imagine. And it's literally a rewiring of those neural pathways and the way that now you've navigated your experiences and how you navigate them now. And even you
Mm.
moving past maybe that some of the startle reflex and symptomatology now to some of that hypervigilance for sure. If you don't mind sharing, maybe just maybe a brief experience that stands out to you as traumatic in your time of serving.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll just give you the very first experience. We hadn't seen a lot of combat yet. We'd only been there for a couple weeks, maybe a month. And it was pretty routine for us every time we left our fob to roll out to what we had this a test fire pit. And we would go out there and test fire our small weapon systems. And like I said, we were mechanized with the Bradley fighting vehicles. Those vehicles are armed with a 25 millimeter cannon and then a 240 Charlie coax machine gun. And so it was SOP that the Bradleys would pull up first while the dismounts us were in the back. They would test fire their 240 Charlies. It's a 7.62 machine gun. And then once they were complete, we would be dismounted, walk up to the edge of the fire pit and fire our weapons into the fire pit. And all of this was just to ensure that our weapons were firing properly, so that when we were out there, if we did get in this, troops in contact, then we knew that our weapon systems were working properly. Um, so on this particular day, the Bradleys were doing their thing, and there was a lull in fire, so it was assumed that all Bradleys were done firing. And so they dismount all of us, and we are walking forward to the test fire pit. And our youngest and newest soldier in the company, a guy named Dustin Kreider, was walking alongside one of the Bradleys. And there's a rule when you walk up along a Bradley, you don't go past a certain point in the direction of the gun, because even if that 25 millimeter Bushmaster goes off, the concussion from that round is enough to kind of disorient you.
Oh, wow.
So somebody mentions to Kreider, "Hey, don't go so far." He continues walking, and just in that moment, or while that's going on, the crew inside the vehicle, apparently they had a malfunction with their 240 Charlie. And so they were in the process of fixing it. And inside the Bradley, you've got the gunner who sits down inside the turret, and then the track commander who sits there. He can be outside of the turret looking around or inside of it. The track commander gave the go ahead to fire to the gunner. The gunner said, are you sure it's clear? Is it, without looking, he said, "Yeah, it's clear." So the gunner went ahead and pulled the trigger. And just as he did so, Kreider had walked into the sights and took 3 or 4 rounds to the back of his head and his upper back.
Wow.
Um, and he fell to the ground dead. And so we all witnessed that. Like, I was probably 20 meters from him.
Wow.
A good close buddy of mine, Tyree, was right next to him. That gunner suffered pretty severely over the years. He recently just passed away from an accidental overdose. So yeah, that was probably the first major one, and for us, it was a reminder, I guess you could say, that what we were doing was real.
Yeah. Thank you for being so transparent and sharing that experience with us. There's a lot of um, stigma around what's traumatizing, and so your transparency definitely kind of just illuminates the real struggles that individuals go through. So I appreciate that. Just one more question on my end. Having PTSD is often stigmatized as people who become overtly aggressive or just scary to be around. And sometimes there may be some reactions. So I was just curious, have you ever had negative reactions from civilians, maybe family or friends? And if so, can you briefly describe those?
I've been called a baby killer, despite having never killed a baby, to my knowledge. Um, yeah, there are some moments. When I came home, I spent a lot of time to myself, and sitting in coffee shops, drinking coffee, and I used to smoke, and I would just sit there and just space out. Anyway, I was sitting at this coffee shop in Fort Smith, near where we're from, and got into a conversation with a fella, and he's all like, "Man, you just got back from Iraq. That's crazy. What's it like over there?" And like typical answer, "Oh, it's hot. Temperature's 130 degrees." I was like, "That's crazy. Did you ever kill anybody?" And at first, I used to answer that question honestly, and then I started to kind of realize like the responses that I was getting, and this doesn't fall into the category of like a negative stigma. It's just where people's minds are at, I believe. The typical response that I would get whenever I would answer honestly, and to answer that question, yes, I have, um, is wow, that's so cool. What's that feel like? And you kind of it's like, is it really cool? You know what I mean? Like to
Mhm.
have to kill somebody because they shot at you, a difference of opinions, or I'm in their country and I shouldn't be, or whatever the case is, right? Whatever their motivations are. And so I started asking people flat out. I was like, why do you want to know? Oh, like, do you genuinely care to know about my response, or do you want to know how cool it is to kill somebody? And more often
Wow.
than not, that's what I got. Um, which I always thought was kind of interesting. But people are very curious, about things that they haven't ever experienced or whatever. So, and you can chalk it up to ignorance because I mean, this is back in 2005, and those who had served in combat. I mean, the last major conflict that the United States had was what the Desert Storm and Desert Shield or Mogadishu. So we were very uncommon within our generation. I will say I've had difficulty in jobs. When you speak of anger, I had very severe anger issues years ago. I had been pulled aside by multiple managers and supervisors telling me that I need to calm down. Been told that I'm very brash, too blunt, too
Mhm.
aggressive. I During a job interview with Walmart corporate, you get asked the question in a lot of jobs like, "Hey, can you speak on a time when you had to do some conflict resolution?" And all I could really
Mhm.
think of was like, conflict resolution. That's what we did in Iraq to a degree. But typically, like our form of resolution was returning fire. And so I'm trying to think of a way to explain this scenario, and she was just pressing, and I thought I was giving my best HR answer, and I just cracked, and I was like, well, I had to decide whether or not to kill this person, and she just kind of looked at me like, wow, you shouldn't have said that in this interview. And naturally, I didn't get the job, but it is what it is. As far as like other crazy stigmas, I mean, I've worked in a lot of federal jobs, and in federal employment, you tend to work with other people who are in the service or who were in the service. And I think that for a vast majority of us, we gravitate towards that because that's where we feel comfortable. Working in a private sector where you're working alongside civilians who've never had these experiences, who've never had this trauma bond that we get in the
Mhm.
military, um, it's very difficult for us to communicate with them and vice versa.
Yeah, thank you. Um, I guess some of those responses that you've given, it's like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that type of reaction of the negative being what maybe you feel, but to them it might be exciting. But for you,
Mhm.
it's a very different experience. So thank you for highlighting that. And that's
Yeah.
my questions. Joe, would
Well,
you
hey,
have any questions? Oh yeah, go ahead. Oh,
hey,
you're good.
I wanted to back up on one thing. When you asked that question about PTSD, and traumatic events, I wanted to give you one that I don't think many people think of.
Okay.
We had
Yeah.
this house that we constantly went to, where it sat on an intersection, and it had the rooftop was an excellent vantage point over this intersection. We often went there at night. And we every time we go to this house, because we didn't maintain the house 24/7, we always had to clear the house. It was a three-bedroom, I'm sorry, a three-story house with a fourth-story roof. This house probably had 15 bedrooms in all, and we had to clear everything every time we went at night. And it had a staircase that would go up a flight, a landing, and go up a flight, and so on. And walking up those stairs as point man in the
Mhm.
dark with night vision with unknown whatever at the top of those stairs, like I can't think about that without having a reaction.
Yeah.
And we never encountered anything at this house. We never got into a fight. We never, nothing like that. But like that for me, clearing upstairs or downstairs in the dark, where there's an unknown presence, if any, is definitely, and I think that's probably what events like that where like the hyper vigilance comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I like what you said. It's not, it maybe that might not have traumatized someone else or something that you've now have a memory ingrained of. All about perception, right?
Yeah.
Definitely we hold different memories, different triggers, different types of reactions to those experiences. Well, thank you
Mhm.
for answering
Yeah,
my questions.
for
Joe,
sure.
do you have any you would
I
like to
do
add?
have questions. I'm going to change gears though. I'm going to pick your brain as a future historian and a
Ooh.
person who worked for
Okay.
VA and what have you.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to look at, I got a question is like, how has the VA and the military changed their policies handling PTSD for veterans and prepared future soldiers for possible events? So you mentioned where the person they talked to, social worker, who said like, oh, it should be gone in 8 weeks. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that's not the standard
Yeah.
conversation anymore. Want
No.
to fill us in on any of that
No,
changes that you know of?
I I should hope that that's not the standard answer anymore. But we see reports, or you know anecdotal evidence of veterans talking about their experiences at their local VAs and how poor it is. The VA that I worked for, that I guess I'm next week is my last week. The VA that I worked for and the VA that I get seen at, um, they do really well, right? But there are cracks, and that's not the specific VA in someone's area. That's just the VA system, right? There are tons of cracks for veterans to fall through. Um, like I worked in the transportation side of things, and if a veteran, was 85 years old and stuck in a wheelchair and lived, 60 miles out into the country, had no way to get to their appointments, but they weren't service connected, they have no service connection disability, they don't qualify for transport, and it's up to them to figure it out. To me, I see that as a disservice to those who did serve.
Mhm.
The flip side to that is you'll see people who served a month, didn't make it through their basic training, and then come to find out they qualified for service connection disability, and now they get full benefits. Um, you know that, hey, everyone's experience is completely different. How they interpret their experiences in basic training, is that's all relative to the individual. I
Mhm.
know from my experience as a drill sergeant, like it's not that bad, but I can't speak for all basic training classes and all drill sergeants and all trainees. But there are things like that, that you see and you hear about, and you're like, wow, man, like the VA should have done something about that. Now, as far as what the military does, I can't say. I do know that they kind of started taking mental health a little bit more serious. When I first became a drill sergeant back in 2008, I was on a trail. I was, acting as a drill sergeant in 2009 for a year. I was mobilized to Fort Sill. We used to refer to mental health as the wizard. So when we would send a trainee to go to mental health, we would say, "Hey, Private so and so needs to go see the wizard." And that terminology got canned because it created a stigma around, mental health, right? So they started calling it behavioral health. And then that later got changed to mental health because, behavioral health created a stigma. Because other trainees would see that, and they would say, "Oh, this trainee, this soldier has something wrong with them. They are mentally unfit. They are a behavioral issue, and they're not capable of doing the same job that I am." And that's just not the case.
Mhm.
So the Army has made some of those changes, in terms of terminology, but in terms of the stigma, it just depends on the small unit leaders, the platoon sergeants, the commanders, and the first sergeants, and the battalion and brigade sergeants major or command teams. how they view it, because there are those out there that still see it that way. They're the old school people that haven't adapted to the new times, and they still see soldiers who go to mental health as a weakness in their ranks,
Yeah.
and that's just not right. Like I've been to mental health, I've been to psych, I've had my issues, and I don't consider myself a weakness. If I needed to go back, and please let that not be the case, I would still be able to perform the functions of my job, either as a drill sergeant or as an infantryman, um, just fine. My body might not want to keep up, but I would be
Mhm.
able to do my job.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of like historically, how George Patton, General Patton actually saw shell shock. He didn't believe it to be a thing. He believed it to be a weakness. And I guess that mentality is still sticking around and really needs to be flushed out of society as a whole, in some
Oh
sense.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Um, Here's a fun one for you, maybe. Try to
Okay.
make it a little bit lighter. As an aspiring historian, since you're going to take my job someday, do you think PTSD was more severe in the past, or was it perceived as worse today? Like, think about modern combat roles and different proximity to the battles and what have you. Like, you know. Think about how medieval knights, one for one almost.
Hmm.
Snipers one for one, while airmen experience PTSD, or the drone strike guy experience PTSD, but it's a different type of PTSD. What's your opinion on this? What is your understanding of this? Both a historian and a person who has been in these roles.
Yes.
Give me,
So
I
I
need
actually really dig this question
2,000
because
words.
it
2,000
okay.
words, 20
Yeah,
pages with citation.
with citation, of course. Yeah, naturally. Chicago.
Yes.
Um, so I actually really dig this question because it addresses another stigma around PTSD and how a person perceives trauma, right?
Mhm.
So let's say you're sitting at home, at your house there in Odessa, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you get a knock on the door. There's banging on the door, and then there's glass breaking, and then somebody busts into your house and punches you in the face and steals your TV, right? You might receive trauma from an event like that, right? You might
Mhm.
receive some level of post traumatic stress disorder from an event like that. Your brain doesn't process trauma differently, right? So how you perceive an event like that, and how I perceive a combat related event, or how I perceive a combat related an event, from my personal experiences, and how somebody 1,000 years ago in a battlefield wielding a broadsword in combat is going to perceive their event. The brain doesn't register it differently, right?
Mhm.
I would argue that 1,000 years ago, for certain warrior type cultures, um, it was more commonplace, and so maybe there's a little bit more adaptation or desensitization to uh, those types of events or those types of roles that they served in.
Mhm.
I know that in the military, you go back to World War I, World War II. General SLA Marshall implemented this big study. There's this big study across the military to try to figure out like why troops in combat weren't engaging the enemy as effectively as they could. And he determined that like we weren't teaching soldiers and Marines to kill people. We were basically teaching them how to shoot at a bullseye target. And
Mhm.
so one of the things that he introduced to help desensitize the mind was the E-type silhouette. That's what we refer to it as to today. It's a human shaped silhouette, right?
Mhm.
You start shooting at something that resembles a person, and at 200 meters or 300 meters, in combat, like all I'm shooting at is a silhouette of a human. I
Mhm.
don't see the face, I don't see the eyes, I don't see that. Now when you get into like what snipers do when they actually are up close and personal, they are, and they're breathing, they're dialed in, it's a little bit more intimate. um Same with, it's honestly going to be the same with your drone pilots. It's more intimate because they are eyes on the target. They're the one hitting the button to release their payload. And so whatever death occurs in that moment typically falls on them. But then you also have the concept of shoot, what did I forget what it's called? It's like passing the buck, basically. I'm the one that pulled the trigger, but my NCO told me to.
The
and
kill
the
chain.
NCO can say, "Yeah, I gave the order. Yeah, I gave the order, but I didn't pull the trigger." And so you can kind of deflect your trauma in that way. But I think a truly honest person will understand, like, yeah, I'm the one that did that. Now
Yeah.
you go back to combat, in 1,000 years ago, even 500 years ago. You talk about knights and swordplay and all that stuff. I mean, an archer, for example, standing on the castle walls, can still feel the effects of PTSD because they're still
Hmm.
firing those arrows into this crowd of people and watching them drop. And that's just the killing process, right? There's still those that are maimed, the smell of death on the battlefield, seeing the aftermath of the battle, and knowing that your friends, your brothers in arms were cut down. Um, you know, so I guess I kind of lost the original question. I don't think there's a difference. I don't think there's a difference. I think PTSD is PTSD
Yeah.
regardless. It's just now we're more aware of it. We stopped giving it silly names like shell shock or battle fatigue, and we're calling it what it is. And for some reason, still society is arguing about whether or not it's a legitimate thing.
Yeah.
And I guess that would be like any final thoughts for you? Like that's kind of a call of action right there is society needs to kind of wake up and realize this is a legit thing. This is not just like, oh, this is not just a weakness of a person. This is not a weakness of a person. This
Yeah.
is everybody can experience this. So you can get this from a
Right.
car wreck. You can get this from just being, robbed. It's like your
Yeah.
brain, you know,
Turning a corner and suddenly there's somebody there who looks suspicious, right?
yeah,
That can be enough to trigger something.
yeah.
But
Absolutely.
yeah.
Any final thoughts, y'all too? For
Didn't you
No,
have more, Joey? You had more questions. What were they?
I had one more question, but I think we're almost running out of time on
might as
recording the
well.
meeting. 7 minutes. We're good. We're good. In what ways can society improve its understanding and education about post-traumatic stress disorder? What important perceived factors or approaches might we be overlooking? What do you think we're overlooking when we are addressing this? I was trying to allow that to happen organically, but you called me out.
The biggest, I think one of the biggest things is that we have this idea or this mentality of the alpha person running around, and to be this alpha person, to be this masculine person, male or female, these certain things that you have to abide by, and these other things, if you experience those things, then you're weak and you don't fall into that. And I feel like society needs to truly understand that concept is, for pardon my language, is bullshit. Because every person, we all have the same, physiology. We all have the same biology. Our brains all operate the same way, right? So to do away with the stigmas, to make people realize that, like, PTSD is a real thing and that people truly do suffer from it, is one. I think you need to be honest with yourself. Like, nobody is out of reach from a traumatic event, right?
Hmm.
you know
Absolutely. Mhm.
you see these posts, and you see these social media, right? It's a big
Movies,
thing, and
social media,
it's
they're
a good,
all.
yeah, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? Social media, because it's a place for these people to spread this nonsense, but it's also a place for people to spread awareness on these subjects. And that's one thing that, when you mentioned, Naomi, a podcast. I used to do one called Before I Forget, and part of it was talking about what the guys like us, who, your regular grunts on the ground, not your special operators, your SEALs, anything like that, like what we did and our experiences, and then the effects of that after the fact. And then part of that was to kind of show that despite those events, despite everything that you experienced, you can still come out on the other end successful in whatever, however you mean successful to be in your life, and better. You can carry that weight
Mhm.
more efficiently and still be, a functioning person, and do well and mean well. But I think we just need to. I think society really needs to let loose of the concept of, you know, this alpha nonsense. Like it's ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, media definitely portrays this really poorly, and then social media is just capitalizing on that. Everybody wants to be Ethan Hunt, Rambo, what have you. But if you actually watch the original
But
Rambo, you
everyone should look
understand that
at
he's PTSD.
Yeah.
right. Well, exactly, and yeah, you know, and we're not really seeing that. I mean, we're seeing it, but we're not seeing it laid out for us, right? But if you watch Black Hawk Down, Eric Bana's character, he plays a hoop,
Hmm.
and at the very end of the movie, Sergeant Eversman, played by what's his name? I can't remember. Jason Eversman. Anyway, doesn't matter. You know, he's like, why do you do it, man? He's like, it's kind of, you know, people, you know, he's or Hoot's giving the story about his friends back home asking him why he does it. Was some kind of like warmonger? You just love killing people? He's like, nah, man, it's not about that. It's about the guy to your left and your right. That's why you do it. Like, yeah, I mean, we have our obligations to question whether or not a an order is constitutional or legal, and we have a right to defy those orders, which seems to be somewhat relevant in modern times. But in reality, I don't know why we were in Iraq. Truly, I do not. When I was there in 2004 to 2005, I do not know why we were there. I don't know what our mission was outside of keep ourselves and our brothers alive, and that's what we did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this conversation was
Yeah,
great. That's a lot of I learned from it. Just different insights, what it means to be, like you said, what did you say, grunt in the on the ground, or how did you say it? Yeah,
yeah, a grunt.
yeah.
Yeah, grunt on the
Well,
ground.
thank you
Yeah.
for sharing,
Mhm.
and allowing us to share your story too. So it is very appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Any
Yeah,
last
Absolutely.
thank
question?
you. No, I don't have any last questions. I think our time is almost up with this anyways, too, on top of all that. So
Yeah.
I thank you
Yeah.
for allowing us to have this interview with you. Live interviews, I feel like, is a little bit better and more organic. And so hopefully when we show this to everybody, when y'all are watching, you see me, hi, you enjoy it.
Absolutely.
No, I agree. Dialogue is a lot better than sitting in front of my camera and then
Mhm.
speaking. Not that the last time we did something like this was bad, and I do appreciate. So I don't know if Joey ever told you, but like he called me right away after seeing it, and was like he learned a few things about me that he never knew.
Hmm.
Um, and that kind of put some other stuff into perspective. Like apparently, I don't talk to my family too much about what I went through and what I go through.
Yeah.
But on that particular subject, I was suicidal. I had lost my purpose in life, and I didn't know where I was going, and that just seemed like the best course of action. I have my beautiful wife and my two beautiful kids, and that is my purpose, and that will be my purpose until the day that I die. But I think, and that's another thing, kind of circling back on that, and I'll wrap it up real quick. These veterans need to find a purpose in life. They need to have that purpose. We had a purpose when we served. We put on that uniform for a reason. Whenever we leave the service, we lose that sense of purpose, that identity. We need to find that purpose again. And I hope that things like this and just people out there advocating for veterans. I hope that's one thing that the message they're putting out is find your purpose in life and hang on to it.
I think that's
But
great.
yeah, with that being said, thank you guys for doing this and honestly doing what you're doing.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
congratulations. I hear you have a
Mhm.
newborn now. Congrats.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
All right.
All right, thank you.